Welcome to CNN Talk. US states restricting abortion. Why now? The question we're asking. Obviously, Bonnie, a hugely sensitive issue, but we're looking at the timing because there seems to be more restriction in the US, certain parts of the US, whereas other parts of the world are becoming more liberal on the issue.
Well, it has to do with the Supreme Court because, like all presidencies, the Trump presidency is a coalition. One of the coalitions is to get rid of Roe v. Wade. And it's why a lot of people are even sticking with him in that coalition. Otherwise, they can't stand him. But if he can get rid of Roe v. Wade...
This is the federal law.
Which, well, is very complicated. But Roe v. Wade upholds the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Now, the argument is that actually that's not true. So if it goes to the Supreme Court, and the balance is now tipped conservative with Donald Trump, also if the circuit is now conservative, it might get shot down. And that's basically what it is.
I mean, it's not quite law yet, but it could well be signed into law very soon. And it's also off the back, this Alabama law, off the back of the Georgia law as well, where they're talking about, they call it a heartbeat bill. I mean, what do you make about the sort of regression here, as many people would describe it?
I think it's a big part of the very worrying culture war that Donald Trump has unleashed. And a lot of women were particularly worried about Trump taking presidency because of his own personal misogyny, but also what he would allow people who wanted to make an attack on the laws around women's reproductive rights. It was very interesting that one of the very, very first things that Donald Trump did, remember they had a picture of him signing off an executive order, was around abortion. And Bonnie's absolutely right. There's lots of things that sort of like, you know, golf club Republicans, you know, don't love.
I've just joined a golf club. Don't just.
So you're not a Republican.
Yeah, but there's a lot of things that they don't like about Trump. But the abortion stuff is something people have been trying to unpick and attack Roe versus Wade for such a long time. Now, because we had this is the reason why the Brett Kavanaugh appointment was so controversial. We know that there will be more changes to the Supreme Court. So there is a more sympathetic atmosphere in the Supreme Court to unravelling these very important abortion laws. And women, not just in America, but around the world, are incredibly worried about it.
Is it politics, this, or is this religion? I mean, what's driving this?
I think it's both those things, and I think what Aisha said is true. It is part of a culture war because the Supreme Court is more conservative than it's been for perhaps a generation with these two new Trump appointments. The pro-life lobby, if you like, the anti-abortion lobby, are pushing this. We had it last week. Georgia became the 16th US state since North Dakota in 2013 to introduce a heartbeat law where you can't have an abortion after a heartbeat is detected. This Alabama law, which will become state law if it's signed by Kay Ivey, the governor, is more restrictive. You can't have an abortion at any time in pregnancy as a Class A felony, with the doctor getting 10 to 99 years, with the woman not being prosecuted. All I'd say is I don't think this has got any chance of overturning Roe v. Wade. I totally understand the symbolism and I totally understand alarm that it's happening, but I think both Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, the new appointments to the Supreme Court, they've both said anti-abortion things, but they've both also said many, many more times that they respect settled precedent. And Roe v. Wade, of course, has been in place since 1973.
I agree with Liam, the last part in particular, because what we haven't talked about, and it's, you know, it's into the weeds of this, Roe v. Wade is based on the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which guaranteed my ancestors their freedom. If you go into...
Welcome to CNN Talk. US states are restricting abortion rights. We'll take you through the detail as we go through the show, but we're asking you the question, why are they doing it now?
Life is a gift of our Creator, and we must do everything that we can to protect life.
The Alabama Senate passes the most restrictive abortion bill in the country,
outlawing almost all abortions in the state, even for victims of rape or incest. Doctors who perform the procedure could get life in prison.
The battle over abortion rights has been raging since the landmark case of Roe v. Wade in 1973, which legalized the procedure nationwide. But now certain states are drafting restrictive bills.
Heartbeat bills and more extreme measures popping up, restricting abortions to often before women even know that they're pregnant.
It's the first time in 46 years that the makeup on the Supreme Court has changed, where there's possibly enough conservatives on there who would believe Roe v. Wade is incorrectly decided.
Republicans, you guys used to say, we want the government out of our life. Now you're in my womb. I want you out.
That's what it's about.
Bev on Facebook says all they will achieve is more women dying as a result of illegal abortion. Madeline says many women want these laws in the South. This isn't just about men. Let's just take you through the Alabama abortion bill just to clarify where we're starting from. It bans abortion at every stage of pregnancy. Doctors face 99 years in prison for performing an abortion. Doctors face 10 years in prison for attempting abortion. The exception is when a mother's life is at risk, but not for rape or incest. So even in cases of rape or incest, it will be legal to have an abortion.
I mean, this is just, whether or not it ever becomes law, and I really hope it doesn't, this sends out a horrendous message to women in America and actually all over the world that in supposedly the most advanced democracy on the planet, women are being sent a signal that they are not allowed to be in control of their own bodies, that they are not allowed to have agency over what they do, even in the most extreme circumstances, rape or incest. And the lack of sympathy, the lack of empathy. I mean, you have Republican sort of senators saying, actually, in terms of the heartbeat thing, saying, well, a woman should know if she's pregnant straight away. If you're a young woman and you have been sort of, you might not even realise what's happening. A lot of women don't even realise they're pregnant until, much further on down the track. And I just think this is a very, very worrying erosion of women's rights. This was the thing that so many feminists and gender equality campaigners feared when Donald Trump became president. One of the first acts he did was sign an executive order, all men in the room, limiting abortion, contraceptives and sort of abortion. This was actually on a sort of global level. He's introduced a gagging ban in terms of overseas countries who get American aid in terms of what they do for contraception and abortion as well. So these are fundamental women's rights that have been fought very, very hard for. And if they do make it illegal, all that will happen is that women will either go underground, they will have backstreet abortions, they will go online and buy abortion pills on the internet. This happens in Northern Ireland. And actually the damage it does to women is absolutely untold as well. So this is an incredibly retrograde step.
So we're talking about the heartbeat bill, just to explain there's a difference between these very different states. So the Georgia bill is what Aisha referring to, bans most abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy, which is when they can detect a heartbeat. But as Aisha says, many women won't know until after they are pregnant that they are pregnant, at that point, so they won't know. So also, they won't have time, even if they realise before 6 weeks, they won't have time to consider it properly.
I want to, you're right, and I want to pick up something that Aisha said. I'm old enough to have lived in the world before this was legal. And in my autobiography, I write about taking a friend to an abortion before it was legal. And it was done by a doctor. And you had to do it at night. He had to do it after hours. And every woman knew who this doctor was. Every woman knew where to find this doctor. He was breaking the law, but he felt that that law was unjust. Women have been getting abortions since women were we came into being. We will continue to get them. This will not stop abortion. What it will stop is safe abortion. And that is the point. Women will never stop this. Doctors will never stop providing this service. They did it before the law was upheld. They'll do it after. It's how many women will die, that's the point.
Absolutely.
Let's hear from an Alabama state senator reacting about cases of rape or incest, which are obviously even more sensitive than other cases.
I would be the same. It's a life is a life, and even if it is its origins are in very difficult situations, that life is still precious. I think my focus would be on the enforcement of those who would perpetrate such heinous acts, and doing everything we can to prevent them.
I mean, this panel has a particular view, but there are people that have the view that, you know, this life has to be protected, and they feel very, very strongly about that.
Yes, people feel very strongly on both sides of this debate. And one side of the debate is constantly demonised, and when you hear things like that, you can kind of understand why. I can't see how anybody can defend that point of view, particularly in cases of rape and incest. I've kind of gone on a bit of a journey, as they say, on this subject, where if we'd been having this discussion 10, 15, 20 years ago, I would probably have adopted a fairly pro-life stance on it. And I am pro-life. I think we should all be pro-life. This is where these labels are are unfortunate. But we have to be pragmatic on these things. You cannot be at either extreme of the argument here. We have to be pragmatic. And Bonnie is absolutely right that if laws like this are passed, abortion won't stop. It's a bit like the debate about legalising prostitution or banning prostitution.
Or homosexual, anything. Yeah.
There will always be people who seek out prostitutes. There will always be women who offer themselves for sex. So you have to deal with the world as it is, rather than as you would like it to be. So therefore, in countries like this one, we have laws that allow abortion up to 24 weeks? Now, there is a debate about whether that should be brought down, and I would support that being brought down to 20 weeks because of the advances of medical science. It is proved now that babies can exist outside the womb often at 20 weeks. Well, and I think that's a legitimate debate to have. But for what's happened here in Alabama, I cannot see how any right-thinking person could think this is the right thing to do. And the reason this is happening, as Liam said in the Facebook section, it's a combination of politics and religion. When I first went to the United States in 1987, the Republican Party was a political party. Since then, it's become a quasi-religious sect. Religion dominates Republican politics now. And the reason this is happening now is because they think they're in sight of victory. Well, I agree with Liam. I think that these two new appointees to the Supreme Court are more than likely not going to tip the balance in the way that the Alabama state senators think they will.
100% agree. And also, not only that, we've got Chief Justice Roberts, who suddenly turned into the swing. And he used to be the conservative, now he's the swing, and Donald Trump goaded him.
Liam, this is the Supreme Court. Those are the two Trump appointments.
These are the two Trump appointments, and that's why, look, Georgia last week became the 16th US state to introduce this heartbeat law, which means abortion's illegal after a heartbeat's detected or detectable, which is often about 6 weeks. We must delineate. Alabama is more restrictive.
Yes.
At any time in the pregnancy, it's a Class A felony with jail term for the doctor of up to 99 years. The woman wouldn't be prosecuted. Why is all this happening now? Well, it started in 2013 when North Dakota did a heartbeat act, but it's really gained momentum now because of these Supreme Court nominations. But in the end, I think both Brett Kavanaugh and Mark Gorsuch, while they're both Republicans, obviously, they're both political appointees. That's what the way the Supreme Court is. I think they both said many times they will respect settled precedent. And Roe versus Wade, sorry to bring it up, Bonnie, it's 1973. It's a long time ago, and I will read that in your autobiography.
It's not that long ago, actually.
No, it's not that.
And no, it's not that long ago.
I was
not in terms of the Constitution.
No, of course.
And that's the point.
We should explain what we're talking about here. Is this so? This Alabama case gets appealed to state level, then to national level. So then Roe versus Wade becomes a debate, which some people are suggesting all this is about.
Well, this again, and this is in the weeds, and Liam partly brought up. Clarence Thomas has thrown a spanner in the works, which is very interesting. What the ruling on Roe v. Wade is that it's called in the English translation is settled law. In other words, they decided on it 43 years ago. It's based on the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, and so therefore we've agreed that that exists. Clarence Thomas says settled law only exists at a moment in time.
So it can be challenged at any time.
Exactly. Settled law can be, the notion of settled law can be challenged. That's what they're going to do first. They'll go in and say this notion cannot stand, because to go back to what Liam says, this notion is a 1973, 74 idea of it. So we can't use that anymore. We have to now go to somewhere else. The dangerous part, to go back to the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which we call part of the Reconstruction Amendments, which freed my ancestors from slavery. If the law can actually go into your body and determine the state of your body, then that can be extended out to a lot of different things, to homosexuality, to autism, to the whole 9 yards, if you interpret it that way. This is why people are fighting about it, and this is going to be the ultimate.
There have to be laws on this sort of thing. I mean, there has to be laws, for example, on IVF. You can't just allow a complete free-fall. The state has a right to have a view on these things. It's just a question of what that view ought to be.
I have to say, I kind of push back against my distinguished colleagues. I would not. I think the one thing we must learn from politics is never assume that just rationality and
you're right to be alarmed.
Exactly, particularly when religion is played. Think about as well just how we know that the culture war is something which is not just like, you know, it's a touch like paper for so much going on in America right now. So I pray that you're right, but my experience over the last few years, let me finish, is basically that we should be prepared for the absolute worst on this. And even if, right at the last minute, it doesn't get ratified by the Supreme Court and Roe and Wade is safe, think on this. The culture and the chilling effect about abortions. People have already been tweeting me. I've been tweeting about this all night. People from America saying, you try and get an abortion in America now. You're already... And about the other myth that a lot of people perpetrate is somehow it's easy getting an abortion. It's a walk in the park getting an abortion. It's a very traumatic thing for most women, not all women. Exactly. And then there are people campaigning outside the clinics, people getting death threats in terms of they're being targeted, going into the clinics, doctors. So let's not kid ourselves. Even though we hope that Kavanaugh will respect precedents, this is sending out a really negative signal.
Of course, you're right to raise all those things. You're right to be alarmed. As a woman, I think you're right to be, won't often be pointed out, of all the states that have introduced these heartbeat laws and so on, all of them have failed. They've all been struck down.
Okay? That does not mean failure. Does not mean that success is not sure.
It's saying that. We have to let me have a go, please. Just let us, even though it is whipping up a culture war to try and get the evangelical Christian vote up against the sort of Hillary Clinton type Democrats. I totally accept it's being done in a deeply cynical way. But this isn't just south of the old Mason-Dixon line. This is happening in Iowa, the ultimate swing state. This is happening in Iowa, another Midwest state.
I don't dispute that.
But this is about the law. And I'm going to sit here and say, if yes, all of these things are happening. Yes, this has been going on for 25 years, the fear of not being able to get an abortion. But if we don't believe in the rule of law, if we don't think the rule of law can prevail, which this is what this is about, then we are doomed. Yes, there
Bonnie,
are...
I think that ship has sailed. Look who we have as the President of the United States.
That ship cannot sail, Aisha.
That ship
cannot sail because the United States of America exists under a Constitution. If that Constitution is not upheld, then we're in trouble.
Bonnie, my dear friend, that could happen. It is possible in civilized societies. Bad things do happen.
Under a Constitution, and that is why it is going to the Supreme Court. Okay. And if the Supreme Court takes it down, yes.
Yeah, but exactly. Yes. But you cannot rule out that bad things will not happen because there is a constitution. And the big lesson that we have to learn in these very, very febrile times is that anything can happen.
On your religion point, Mark on Facebook says almost all opposition to abortion is related to religious beliefs, and religion leaves no room for personal choice or destiny.
Yeah.
Let's hear from the Alabama Democratic senator who's been really opposing this whole move in her state.
Republicans, you guys used to say, we want the government out of our life. We want them out of our business. We want them out of our bedroom. Yeah, you said one out of my bedroom. Now you're in my womb. I want you out. You don't control this. You don't own this.
That's what it's about.
And a lot of it's been,
That's what it's about.
I mean, we've got an image of the faces of the Alabama vote. I mean, I know what Aisha's going to say, but just talking to men, get out of.
Yeah, and it's an unfortunate image, isn't it? As Aisha said, when Donald Trump signed that executive order, it was in a room full of white men, and here you've got exactly the same. And I'm looking around, not a black man among them.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean. You know what? Look. Because these guys, I know you didn't say this, but let me just put it out there. Because these, no. What I mean is that you
strap yourself in.
Well, I didn't say anything.
No, you didn't.
I wasn't given the chance to say anything, Bonnie. But carry on.
Sorry.
Carry on.
No, what I want to say is, just because these guys are up there are white doesn't mean that's why that happened or what happened. There are plenty of black male conservatives who are totally in that bag. They just didn't happen to get elected to the Alabama
Also, there are women.
Senate.
A woman will sign it off. A woman will sign it off.
They didn't get elected to the Alabama Senate. That's all. I
think we have to. It's very easy for us sitting 3,000 miles away to pontificate about what happens in the United States. And I think sometimes in Europe we don't understand where a lot of this comes from, the social conservatism that exists in many parts of the United States, not necessarily on the coast, but in the middle. And I think we should sometimes try a little bit harder to understand that. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I mean, the state senator in that clip was absolutely right. Sitting here as a gay man, I don't want the state to impose rules and regulations on what I'm supposed to think or do. All I ask for is equality with everybody else. And I don't think that's too much to ask. But of course, not just on abortion rights in America, you now have a tax on gay rights too in many states.
But often with these things, it's a bit like anti-Semitism is often the canary down the coal mine for other forms of prejudice. And I think women's reproductive rights, it's a similar thing as well. And the point you made about, look, can we try and better understand the feelings of others? Sometimes you just can't understand the feelings of others. I am never going to understand somebody who discriminates against the colour of someone's skin in the same way that you probably wouldn't ever understand somebody who is just intrinsically sort of homophobic.
That, I think, is slightly different to abortion rights, if I may say so.
He's right.
Because it is a legitimate thing to believe that life begins at the moment of conception. However much the pro-abortion lobby argues against that, I actually do believe that.
But that's what you believe. But that's what you
But my family
have a different view. And in terms of people think about the life of the woman, and that's what a lot of people feel. These pro-lifers are not thinking about the life of the woman.
We're coming back to the show. We'll be back in just a moment. Mark says Conservatives love to tell people how to live their life.
Yeah, but so do liberals. Look, Ian is right. My Republican family side are Republicans because they're pro-life. Now, I can have a huge argument. We have huge arguments at Thanksgiving over this, but you can't have an argument about this.
But there isn't in a conflict here in political terms, because Republicans would generally believe in small state and freedom of the individual, which completely goes against all these social conservative things. At least I think I'm being quite consistent in that I believe individuals should have the right to determine what happens to themselves.
Yeah. By the way, the hypocrisy is off the scale as well, because a lot of these, particularly the men involved in this, have probably made their mistresses get abortions over the years as well. So it is true.
You have a few tweets to that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it is absolutely true.
But you know what the
Ian, it
senator
is
said?
absolutely
Someone said
true.
there needs to be a castration law as well.
Well, why not? Why not have a castration law?
If you're going to stop unwanted pregnancy, you gotta literally stop it. So that's what someone proposes.
I'd happily introduce a castration law for rapists.
And we're just pointing out that we don't know that any of those men are in that situation.
No, I'm not saying so. I'm just saying, but historically, let's be quite honest. There is often a huge amount of hypocrisy around this as well.
I mean, we've been talking about this. If it is just conservative white men who belong to the pro-life lobby, it absolutely is not. There are plenty of women that do as well.
Listen, The Handmaid's Tale.
My family is pro-life.
A big debate, as you can tell here on CNN Talk today. We're talking about the US states restricting abortion. We're asking why now. Tammy on Facebook says, babies matter, stop killing our children. I want to bring you this tweet from Alyssa, who's got a solution. She's talking about a sex strike. Our reproductive rights are being erased until women have legal control over our own bodies. We cannot risk pregnancy. Join me by not having sex until we get bodily autonomy back. And she spoke to Chris Cuomo last night.
So many comments, which I'm going to keep to myself.
I don't think there's a human on the planet that is not pro-life. Nobody wants to get an abortion. Nobody. We are all pro-life. But there are circumstances that we cannot avoid. There's the mother's health. There's just not being ready, you know, and what that means financially and for someone's destiny. This is an economic issue.
Ian doesn't want to give his personal thoughts, he said, on this, so I'm going to ask you what his personal thoughts are.
I think it's actually quite an innovative thing to...
It's getting attention.
It is, of course it's getting attention. There'll be many women that say, well, I'm on an involuntary sex strike anyway. Many men would say that. I think
Most women are just too tired.
Well, join the club.
They're just too harassed. Just like, listen, if you want to start the dishwasher, maybe, but you know...
I mean, can we sort of go back to almost where we started on the rape and incest thing? Because that is something I really struggle with. Even if you are sort of on the extreme pro-life end of the argument, I don't understand how you cannot see that that is something different. And you could even say sort of incest is even worse than rape because, I mean, if you have a child with a family member, the chances are that it will be disabled.
Well, let me tell you a story about that.
Roman Catholic, very strictly, I can tell you that we were raised to honor saints who allow themselves to be killed rather than be raped or to have babies or any of that, or to have the baby. And so it is very much a part of people's religion that you have this child because God sent you this child.
But I just want to pick up on the incest stuff. So Northern Ireland is a very interesting example. We're talking about America far, far away, like it could not happen here. It happens on United Kingdom soil. Abortions are banned in Northern Ireland, even though Northern Ireland is meant to be a part of the United Kingdom. And I covered a case recently where a young woman was abused by her uncle. So he raped her and she got pregnant and she was very young. She was about 14. She had to travel to mainland England, Liverpool, to get an abortion. And the only reason why she ended up sort of not getting prosecuted and her family, the police came with her, and this is so horrific. They took a cell sample of the aborted fetus to prove that there was DNA from the uncle, so it was incest. Now, when you are getting to that level of control of a woman's... And this is where these laws end, by the way. They start with talk about pro-life.
This goes back to what I said about pragmatism, and that has to come in, and common sense, for goodness sake.
But I really want to go back as the American-born person at this table to tell you that the United States Constitution, if it gets that far, no matter what happens on the ground, if this decided to uphold this law, that's the end of it. Now, and that is what this is designed to do. I have total faith in the United States Constitution because it's enabled my ancestors to be where they are. So we wanted to get to that point, to have this duke out at last. And also to go back to the fact that Alabama, this is a very clever move on the part of Alabama, because they don't know how long Trump is going to be where he's going to be. So this is going to be rushed all the way up to the top, and it will be a test not for Neil Gorsuch, but it will be a test for John.
Maria says, practice safe sex and use birth control. It's a no-brainer. It's your responsibility.
Oh, for goodness sake, that's so ridiculous.
Yeah, but, you know, contraception can go wrong even when used very, very carefully.
Tell her so she knows.
It can prove to be ineffective. And just going back to the Alabama legal change, which Kay Avey is likely to sign into law, the governor, which will then be struck down. It may end up to the Supreme Court. I don't think it would happen before November 2020.
Maybe
so this is a second-term Trump issue, if indeed he gets a second term. But I'm equally shocked, and we do have roughly the same views on this panel, and this is a panel of a certain view, and we're right to point that out. But I was shocked by the rape and incest lack of exception for that, because the Alabama legislature did make exception for other things. So the precedent of an exception, they made exception for serious health risk to the mother, an ectopic pregnancy when the fetus develops in the fallopian tube.
And I think if the baby's got something terminal as well.
Absolutely.
Although
they did make an exception, which seems strange that they didn't then make an exception for rape and
experts are
incest.
saying that there's still quite a lot of loopholes for women. There's quite a high threshold to pass.
But Can I tell you something about Alabama, quickly about Alabama? Incest and rape. We are talking about incest and rape as metropolitans. Alabama talks about it within families and all kinds of different interpretations.
Fabian says this is just a ploy to give SCOTUS an excuse to overturn Roe, but Mary says more and more people actually want unborn babies protected. Thank you for listening on the podcast. You can look up CNN Talk at Apple Podcasts if you like that option. Otherwise, you can watch us again on Facebook and join the debate there. Thank you for watching.